And welcome everyone to the Maritime Education Podcast. My name is Barry Sadler, and to those of you who are regular listeners, welcome back to the podcast. If you're new to the podcast, welcome on board. I'm sure you're going to find some of the things that we have discussed during the past year to be of interest, regardless of whether you operate in a maritime environment or not. They all carry some value to pretty much just about everybody, but especially those of you who are studying at the moment for certificates of competency or studying for any other maritime project. Now, I like my podcasts to be topical, and I like them to reflect on what's been happening recently. And as I'm sure a lot of you, particularly around the UK coast, are aware, we have had some incredibly bad weather recently. This poor weather has caused numerous weather warnings to be issued by the Met Office. So weather warnings for rain, weather warnings for wind. For those of you who are watching Storm Bram come over today, Tuesday the 9th of December, Storm Bram has amber warnings for rain in two parts of the UK, and a huge swathe of the United Kingdom is under a yellow warning for both wind and rain, as this rather intense low pressure skirts along our western flank. Storm Bram actually showed signs of explosive cyclogenesis as she powered up coming across the Atlantic. Explosive cyclogenesis, of course, being the process where a low pressure system deepens by more than 24 hectopascals in 24 hours. Storm Bram deepened 26 hectopascals in 24 hours, meaning that it was suffering explosive cyclogenesis. Explosive cyclogenesis is important because it generally indicates that we're going to have a very deep low pressure, and that the isobars around that low pressure are going to be very, very tight together, and that's going to create a lot of wind. On the back of that, we've got a lot of warm air coming into the UK at the moment, and that warm air is capable of supporting more moisture, and that moisture is going to give us heavier rain. On the 7-day forecast the other day, the forecaster said that this morning, again, that's Tuesday the 9th of December, the temperature in the morning, so the lowest temperature, so 6 o'clock in the morning, the lowest temperature in the morning is effectively going to be 3 degrees higher than the average daily temperature for this time of year. So that gives you an indication as to how warm the air masses are that we're experiencing at the moment. Warm air mass means more moisture, it means more energy. It means that low pressures are capable of deepening very, very quickly and producing some very, very high winds. As I said, these high winds can cause pilot stations to close, ports to stop to operate. Large cranes are unable to work cargo in this wind. But a few days ago, we had another type of incident that was caused by heavy weather at the pilot station, and that was some loss of cargo over the side of a small container ship. It wasn't headed for Southampton; it was headed for Portsmouth. The small container ship approaching Portsmouth turned itself onto a course to try and provide a lee for the pilot boat trying to embark a pilot on board, and in the process of doing so started to roll very, very heavily. The ship itself rolled to around 25 degrees, the crew state, and during one of these big rolls, 16 containers were lost overboard from the ship. Now, this particular ship's cargo, the majority of the containers on board were refrigerated containers, where the temperature inside the container is controlled either directly by a refrigerated unit or by insulation and packing, so that foodstuffs can arrive in the UK in good condition. The foodstuffs that formed the majority of the contents of these containers were in fact bananas. And these 16 containers washed overboard whilst the ship was manoeuvring. Needless to say, the pilot launch had to abort. The pilot didn't board the ship. The ship was turned around and was sent back out to the anchorage by the King's Harbour Master through Southampton VTS. And no further attempt was made to board the ship. Now, of course, you've got a real issue in the approaches to the Solent, because you've now got 16 containers either floating or sunk in the vicinity of a pilot station, coming towards night time. So this happened about 6 o'clock in the evening. So this time of year, we've pretty much already got darkness, and we're not looking at getting light for another 12 hours. So in the dark, you've now got 16 containers. You don't know where they are. You don't know whether they are stuck together in pairs. You don't know whether they have sunk to the bottom. You don't know whether they are in neutral equilibrium. So in neutral stability, they are literally floating just below the surface. So they've got enough buoyancy to just stop them sinking, but not quite enough buoyancy to make them float above the surface. So effectively, they have neutral stability, neutral flotation, and they float just below the surface, a major navigational hazard. Of course, if these containers were to sink, this pilot station was in the vicinity of the deep water route into the Solent. Deep water route followed by container ships on their way to Southampton's DP World Container Terminal. Deep water route used by very large crude carriers on their way to the Forley Marine Terminal in Southampton Water. So a deep water route that is pretty much used on a daily basis. And so if any of these containers have sunk, then they may have sunk in the vicinity of the deep water route and may even be sat in the dredged area of that deep water route. Now, since the incident happened, they have managed to account for 13 of the 16 containers. So most of these containers, in the very, very strong southwesterly winds, have now washed up on the coastline to the northeast of the Nab Tower boarding area, and have been recovered by teams on the beaches. Obviously, the public have been down there because news spread fast when containers go over the side, but it is literally pretty much every single one that was lost carried bananas. There was a couple of other foodstuffs in there, but perhaps more significantly and more importantly, there wasn't any real value to any cargo that was in there. Nonetheless, this didn't stop everybody taking a trip down to the beach for a look nonetheless, and social media is full of pictures of bananas on seafront benches, broken and damaged containers littering the beach. Unfortunately, these containers, of course, being refrigerated containers, had a lot of lagging on the inside of them, and this lagging is proving to be really, really difficult to clean up, as it has obviously split and fallen out of the container, either when it hit the water from falling off the ship, or in the heavy weather that blew it ashore. More likely, the containers have been damaged as they have been blown ashore, with the waves pounding against them, slowly pushing them up the beach, has done the majority of the damage. But nonetheless, it is a significant event from lots of different angles, and that's what I want to talk about. The different issues that we have when some of this cargo is lost. Now, the main issue that I have mentioned already, and I think it's pretty obvious, and that is obviously safety of navigation in and around the area where these containers were lost. Now, losing containers over the side will cause there to be a risk assessment made by the ports involved. In the case of Southampton, that risk assessment resulted in a cessation of traffic going past the Nab. The local media reports that the cruise ship Iona was delayed in her departure because we couldn't guarantee the safety of that vessel transiting through the area of the Nab Tower from a safety of navigation point of view. Now, there's obviously got to be some very, very quick action made by both the port authority and the master of the vessel to ensure that these navigational hazards are brought to the attention of shipping without delay. Now, obviously, the master must quickly assess any danger to navigation that any cargo, but in particular containers, that he or she has lost from their ships, and having assessed the danger to navigation, warn nearby vessels using appropriate means under the GMDSS system. Now, the most obvious of this would be to use the VHF radio, to use the Securite message, and to broadcast a Securite on Channel 16, advising vessels in the area that there may be a navigational hazard from those floating containers. Now, at the end of the day, the onus is on the master to inform everybody concerned that he's lost these containers overboard, so that each and every stakeholder may start to put in place measures to minimise the effects of these of this loss of cargo. So a master is required to report any incident that endangers navigation to the nearest coastal state. Now, not only is this a requirement of United Kingdom legislation, this is also a requirement under UNCLOS, UNCLOS Article 94. UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, requires masters to report any incident that endangers navigation. It is also required to report pollution, and of course these containers, although they are containers that were initially sealed, must of course be reported as a pollutant into the water. Now, they are a major navigational hazard, a Category A navigational hazard as it's called, and that requires immediate notification to shipping in the area. So the master has an obligation to inform the nearest coastal state, so in this case was the United Kingdom through the UK Coastguard. Nearest port authority, which in this case is the King's Harbour Master at Portsmouth. An obligation to inform their own flag state, an obligation for them to inform their designated person ashore. In UK waters, the loss of cargo must be reported to the Maritime and Coastguard Agency. And now, by reporting to the Coastguard via VHF or MF immediately once the cargo has been lost, that can be considered to be the MCA being informed, because obviously the Coast Guard is part of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. Now, lucky enough, nothing in these containers was either a IMDG, so an International Maritime Dangerous Good, or other than the debris from the containers, was not a serious harmful substance to be in the water, and therefore, it wasn't oil, it wasn't noxious liquid. It was, of course, garbage because it's foodstuffs, because it's bananas, but it wasn't packaged DGs or anything like that. So, the containers aside, the contents of the containers were not a dangerous good. And although they require reporting under MARPOL to the nearest coastal state as being lost, at least these containers didn't contain anything that could have caused harm to marine life in the area, or to humans for that matter. We can't completely ignore the containers themselves. Obviously, the containers themselves are a pollutant. They, especially the lagging inside these refrigerated containers, which is broken up. It's this I don't know the best way to describe it really. It's almost this foam lagging that's quite solid with the two silver plates on either side, and you can snap that fairly easily. And unfortunately, when it snaps into many pieces. And a lot of the somewhat distressing photographs of the beach that have been posted on social media show the lagging from the containers breaking up on the shoreline. Obviously, there is ISM code requirements here, so the master must, of course, report the incident as part of compliance with the ISM code using the safety management system and the instructions within that safety management system, and, of course, the flag state administration as part of compliance with the ISM code must be informed, as must the vessel's insurers and P&I Club, because obviously they are going to have to take some responsibility for the clear up of this cargo. Masters do have a duty to mark and warn, if possible, cargo that's been lost over the side. Now, attempting to mark cargo is very, very difficult. And this incident happened at a time where there was quite a lot of wind, quite a lot of swell, as I say, in the hours of darkness. So marking the position with a buoy or anything like that, pretty much impossible for the master to do that safely. So having informed the port authorities and the coastal state, the marking of this, if possible, would fall on that the Coastguard, in our case, to do it. Obviously, the master's got to make logbook entries regarding the loss of these containers over the side. Will be an official logbook entry because it is, of course, an incident. So date, time, position, estimated numbers of containers that were lost. You may even want to annex the manifests for each container to the official logbook to back up your entry when you put it in there. You should also make a note of the weather and sea conditions, any actions that you've taken to prevent further loss of cargo, and also it's a good idea in the logbook to make a note of who the incident has actually been reported to. Now, insurance and liability duties when you've lost cargo over the side generally fall under the Hague-Visby or Rotterdam rules. Now, Hague-Visby, let's stick with Hague-Visby rather than trying to confuse things by mentioning that and the Rotterdam rules. Hague-Visby are a set of legally adopted rules that a carrier must comply with in order to ensure that cargo is carried properly. So what does that mean? That fundamentally means that to comply with the Hague-Visby requirements, the carrier must exercise due diligence before the voyage to ensure that the ship is seaworthy and capable of carrying that cargo. This must include providing proper lashing gear for the cargo, a competent crew to lash and monitor the cargo, and of course correct stowage plans for the cargo. Throughout the voyage, the carrier must properly watch the cargo, ensure the cargo remains stowed properly, lashed properly, and care for the cargo as per the shipper's requirements. Failure in lashing is generally treated as unseaworthiness when it comes to the insurance of the vessel. And under Hague-Visby, if you haven't lashed your cargo properly, then that could make the ship unseaworthy and may open the ship owner up to liabilities under those Hague-Visby rules. In other words, the shipper has given the ship the container. They expect the container to be loaded, lashed properly on board, and discharged properly at the next port in compliance with Hague-Visby. But if the cargo hasn't been lashed properly, and we don't know this yet, there will of course be an investigation, but we don't know whether the containers on this ship off the Nab were or were not lashed properly. That's something for the investigation to look at, but if they were not, then that may affect the ship owner's ability to use underwriters to carry out or to pay for the liabilities that come from such an incident. Hague Visby itself sets out minimum legal responsibilities for sea carriers. Yep. And although Hague Visby in itself is not a law, Hague Visby are seen as reasonable rules that can be used to determine whether or not a ship was fit to carry cargo in the first place. Now, obviously, there are perils of the sea that Hague Visby cannot foresee. One of those perils of the sea is, of course, heavy weather. And as we opened this podcast, we did say that, heavy weather was perhaps responsible for these containers being lost overboard from the ship. The ship manoeuvring to pick up a pilot and rolling in heavy weather as a result of the manoeuvre requested by the pilot launch. It is important to remember that any instruction given to a master, if the master considers that instruction unsafe, then the master can use his or her discretion for a reason of safety to ignore that instruction. Yep. So any decision made by the master for a reason of safety cannot be questioned by anybody. So if a pilot launch says, "Captain, I want you to head in this direction because this is the heading that we need you to be on for us to embark our pilot," and the master considers that heading to be hazardous to the vessel, then using master's discretion as defined in SOLAS Chapter 5 Regulation 34.1, the master can refuse that heading and not put the ship in a dangerous position. Because it was dark, because it was a following sea, because the weather was very, very poor, and because the master was very, very used perhaps to doing what a pilot launch asked him or her to do, it would perhaps be a little bit unreasonable for the master to have been able to foresee that the ship would have rolled quite as heavily as it did, having been given an instruction from the pilot launch to come round to a particular heading. So it would perhaps be a bit unfair to turn around and say, "Captain, you should have known the ship was going to roll." It would have been difficult for that master to have been able to gauge the sea conditions in darkness, and particularly the sea conditions locally at the Nab Tower. The Isle of Wight, the middle of the Isle of Wight basically extends east, south of the Nab Tower, producing a cork shelf. And this cork shelf can cause swell and waves to build up fairly dramatically as they approach the Nab Tower. This is a local phenomena that is well known to pilots, pilot launch drivers and port authorities, but may not be particularly well known to the master. So the master would have been somewhat in the dark, almost literally, with regards to how much sea was actually running and what effect that sea was going to have on his ship when he went onto the heading requested by the pilot launch. So one of the defences under Hague Visby is, of course, perils of the sea, and weather is a peril of the sea. So it would be very difficult for somebody to prove that the master could reasonably know that his ship was going to roll so heavily when he turned onto that heading, and therefore we could say that a defence here would be a peril of the sea, and that would mean that the carrier had effectively, so by carrier we mean the ship owner and the master, they are the carrier of the cargo. Yeah, the carrier is effectively exempted, shall we say, under Hague Visby. In other words, they showed due diligence right up until the point at which a natural event took over and the perils of the sea caused there to be some loss and liability. Very, very much a burden of proof and evidence must be used to show that the ship lost its cargo due to some sort of lashing failure. Yep. So the shipper must be able to show that the cargo was in good order before it was landed, before it was put on the ship. In other words, the containers were not damaged. the carrier must show that they exercised due diligence in lashing and securing the cargo, including producing lashing plans and mates' receipts and remarks to show that sufficient lashing was put on and that the lashings were in good order. You know, at the end of the day, it's up to the carrier to the burden of proof is there on the carrier to show that they lashed the cargo properly and therefore could not have foreseen that cargo going over the side in the conditions under which it did. At the end of the day, there's a lot that is going to come out from a liability point of view of losing these containers over the side. There's the delays to shipping to and from both Portsmouth and Southampton. There's obviously the recovery and clean-up operation that is currently being undertaken on the beaches to the northeast of the Nab Tower, where the majority of these containers have washed up. There's the very, very careful and meticulous survey of the deep water route that must now be done in order to ensure that none of these 3 missing containers have sunk in the deep water route. We allow 2.2 metres under keel in the deep water route when bringing in a big container ship. And that's pretty much, you know, almost the height of a container. So if a container is sat there upright in the bottom of the deep water route, that could be a serious navigational hazard. So the deep water route is going to have to be very, very carefully surveyed. That's going to add cost. So the liabilities for this incident are stacking up. Somebody's going to have to pay for the cleanup. Somebody's going to have to pay for the delays. Somebody's going to have to pay to have it surveyed. Somebody's going to have to ultimately pay for the damaged cargo as well. And somebody may want their containers paid for as well, because they have also been lost, the actual receptacles themselves. So there's a lot of liability attached to an incident like this. And although investigations may be made by the port state, by the flag state, in our case, the MAIB may wish to investigate, ports may wish to investigate, lots of people are going to look as to why this happened. This does not remove that burden of proof on the carrier to show that they did everything right prior to these containers being lost over the side. Losing cargo over the side under any circumstance is a real, very, very high risk incident to happen. It's not just about what you leave in the water, it's about what's left on board as well. And there have been incidents recently, particularly with container ships, where cargo has been lost over the side, and that has left the remaining cargo on board the ship in an unstable state. And so sometimes it's not just about dealing with the aftermath and the liabilities of what's happening in the water. It's about dealing with what's happening on board the ship, trying to secure the cargo to prevent more cargo from being lost over the side, but at the same time being very, very mindful of safety and risk assessment, and not putting crew at risk by asking them to try and lash containers that may already be on their way over the side. This in itself can also prove to be incredibly dangerous. And it's worth bearing in mind that sometimes you've just got to live with the loss of cargo rather than put people's lives at risk trying to secure containers that are already moving around in heavy weather where it's very, very difficult to stop a container ship from rolling. Most container vessels have got very, very good stability. They've got very, very big GMs. And the trouble with this is that a lot of containers, particularly those that are part laden, end up in what we call a stiff vessel. That's a vessel that rolls very, very fast, returns to the upright very, very quickly. Now, unfortunately, that may have been the case with the ship that lost the containers in the Solent, that when it turned onto that course and started to roll, the roll might have been particularly violent. bearing in mind the fact that a ship like that would have very good stability in a very, very short, sharp rolling period, a very small rolling period itself, and the righting levers to bring the ship upright are going to be very, very big, causing the ship to roll violently. This is the case with many container ships, and there have been numerous container ships that have lost containers over the past 5 years, some of which quite dramatically, not just 16 like we lost in the Solent a few days ago, but some have lost hundreds of containers over the side in heavy weather. Container ships themselves, by their sheer nature, are quite stable, and therefore the lashing of cargo on container ships must be done very, very carefully to a very, very strict lashing plan in order to show due diligence under Hague-Visby that you've done everything possible to stop this cargo being lost over the side. Hopefully we'll track down these 3 missing containers over the next couple of weeks and verify that they no longer pose any kind of navigational hazards to ships going to and from the ports of Southampton and Portsmouth. In the interim, we have put out navigational warnings. We've put out instructions to ships not to use the deep water route. And at the end of the day, everything that can be done is being done to try and prevent ships from being damaged by these missing 3 containers. As I say, hopefully they'll be located soon. Hopefully the deep water route will be declared as safe soon, and shipping in the Solent can return to some form of normality. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. I hope it's explained a little bit some of the implications of that incident at the Nab Tower a few days ago, and in particular, how it perhaps can be avoided and what some of the liabilities are and who they fall upon when such an incident happens. Thanks a lot for listening, everyone. We look forward to welcoming you back to the Maritime Education Podcast in the near future. In the meantime, have a great day, everyone, and we'll speak to you again soon. Just before I sign off from today's podcast, just want to bring your attention to the fact that we've recently launched an app. So currently we have an app that deals with collision avoidance and the coal regs themselves. This is a new venture for us. It's an online app, so it's a web app. It has over 500 questions on it. And anything from flip cards all the way through to actions that you must take, to light identification, to identification of buoys using their light rhythms. There's all sorts of ways in which we ensure that your collision regulation and buoyage knowledge is as good as it should be for your MCA oral exam. Check out our website, www.captainbarrysadler.com. and follow the links on there to the app where you can download the subscription and access that app on any device, really, on a laptop, on a tablet, on your mobile phone. As I say, it is a web app at the moment. It's not a standalone app. One of the main reasons for doing this was that we wanted to make sure that the app was running well and that everybody was getting the most out of it. It's easier, as I'm sure some of you will know, to adjust and change the app if it is a web-based app rather than a standalone app on the Apple or the Android stores. Once we can see that it's running well and that it's doing what it says on the tin, then we will be able to launch it as a standalone app. But check it out nonetheless. It is a very, very useful tool for ensuring that your collision regulations are right up to scratch. Thank you very much, everyone.